Three imponderables excited the derision. Apart from the fact that nobody had stopped a light from burning out, there was the issue of generating enough power with the crude dynamos of the day, and then distributing power over a very large area. Other experimenters in both arc and incandescent lighting had used a great deal of current, and Edison's critics assumed he would have to use even more to compensate for the energy losses of distribution over the distances he envisaged. This meant he would have to enlarge the cross-section of his copper conductors at great expense. But that was not all. Independent switching, Edison promised, could be achieved only if the lamps were wired in the newfangled system of parallel or branch line wiring, consuming exponentially more current, requiring still fatter, expensive copper cabling, so that the whole project was scientifically stupid and economically hopeless. Edison was not even on the fringes of being able to resolve these dilemmas in the early fall of 1878, when his sage counsellor Grosvenor Lowry, who had encouraged Edison to fly his colourful kite in the press, moved adroitly on his behalf in New York's banking parlours. It had been customary to portray Edison as a scientific visionary having to contend with ignorant capitalists, but at this initial point it was the scientific community that was myopic, and the capitalists associated with Vanderbilt's Western Union and the banker John Pierpont Morgan, who sponsored innovation, though taking a bigger gamble than they realized at the time. In October, Lowry swiftly raised $300,000 to form the Edison Electric Light Company, with $50,000 in cash for Edison and $2,500 of the 3,000 shares in return for his yielding his electric light patents and any improvements he might make for the next 5 years. In comparison, William Sawyer's funding from the speculator Alban Mann around the same time amounted to no more than $4,000. Edison already had the finest research laboratory in the country, and progressively he enriched it with a machine shop and university-trained engineers and scientists. The most significant appointment walked across the muddy lane from the railway stop on Friday the 13th of December, one Francis Upton, disciplined mathematical graduate of Bowdoin College and Princeton, 2 years Edison's senior. The diffident Bostonian was a pianist of some note, so Edison nicknamed him Culture. Upton's arrival effected a marvellous marriage of the intuitive and the instructed. Upton bought instruments to measure resistance and current, and calculated what would happen if they tried to light 100-watt lamps by sending just 1 ampere of current at 100 volts on multiple circuits. Answer: the resistance of the filament would have been as high as 100 ohms. In this way, incandescence could be maintained with a low expenditure of energy and a saving in the dimensions of copper cabling. It was the scale of the saving that astounded them both. They would need only 1/100th of the weight of copper as was needed in a low-resistance system. Edison patented a high-resistance lamp in April 1879. All they had to do now was find a filament that did not oxidize but had a high resistance, then heat it up to incandescence in a bulb as close to airless as they could get to hinder oxidization. Filament and vacuum proved more elusive than Edison had hoped. He had discarded carbon because it burned up so readily. Platinum wire in short strands offered only low resistance, but did not oxidize and therefore seemed to offer the best prospect of staying alight. They worked on making long spirals of thin platinum to increase the resistance, but it was delicate and dangerous work. At one point, a glowing platinum filament burst on Edison's head, the explosion temporarily blinding him. From 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. he suffered the pains of hell. A massive dose of morphine finally allowed him to sleep. The romantic story, retailed by Marshall Fox in the New York Herald, and no doubt encouraged by Edison as mythmaker, is that at this frustrating moment he received a gift from the gods. Marshall Fox wrote, "Sitting one night in his laboratory, Edison began abstractly rolling between his fingers a piece of compressed lampblack mixed with tar for use in his telephone. For several minutes his thoughts continued far away, his fingers meanwhile mechanically rolling over the little piece of tarred lampblack until it had become a slender filament. Happening to glance at it, the idea occurred to him that it might give good results as a burner if made incandescent." End quote. A few minutes later, lampblack carbon was tried, and hey presto, they were on the road to success. Alas, the laboratory notebook suggests cerebral rather than celestial inspiration. It was the prospect of evacuating most of the air from the bulb that allowed Edison to consider carbon again. He had put a classified advertisement in the New York Herald for a glassblower and found himself greeting an 18-year-old in a little red German student cap. The Menlo Park mockers were amused by the dainty Ludwig Bohm and his pince-nez, but he blew a better bulb to Edison's design, and he helped the vacuum team work out a new way of evacuating a bulb by infusions of mercury. Edison combined two different types of pump to create the most effective vacuum pump of the time. It was laborious, frustrating work, many bulbs shattered, but in September, after weeks of effort, they achieved a vacuum of 1/100th of an atmosphere. Edison urged them to keep trying, but he discovered that even at this level they had so reduced the oxygen in the bulb that a carbon stick did not burn up quickly, and it gave a better light than platinum ever had. That was the good news. The less good news was that resistance to this particular piece of carbon was only around 2 ohms, which would mean more current, more copper. Resistance could be raised by shaping a tiny filament in a small spiral to reduce radiating surface, but the filament would have to be no thicker than 15,000ths of an inch. It was counterintuitive to think that such a frail element could survive in super-high temperatures, but Edison set everyone in a frenzy trying to roll carbon into reeds no thicker than cotton thread. Day after day, night after night, the spiral reeds kept breaking.